So picture this. The United States is brand new, it's fragile, and suddenly you've got this collision course between a new federal tax and that old fiery spirit of revolution. The whole crisis would test the absolute limits of the new Constitution, and it would put one of its own designers on the judge's bench to figure out what treason even meant in this new country. All right, so let's just jump right in with a question that gets to the absolute core of our story. What do you think was the very first act of treason against the United States? The answer? Well, it takes us to a moment that could have completely torn the young republic apart.
Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1794. We're in western Pennsylvania, and the flashpoint is a new federal tax on whiskey. Now, you gotta understand, for these farmers out on the frontier, whiskey wasn't just a drink. It was basically money. It was the heart of their economy. So when the government slapped a tax on it, they saw it as totally oppressive, and things boiled over fast into a full-blown armed rebellion.
And make no mistake, this wasn't just some small protest about taxes. The brand new federal government saw this as a direct challenge to its right to exist. This was it. This was the nation's first real test.
So, how did the government respond? Well, they went big. I mean, really big. President George Washington himself calls up a massive militia. We're talking bigger than the army he had for a lot of the Revolutionary War. But what's really telling here are the quotes from his team. You've got Alexander Hamilton, who basically sees this as a golden opportunity. He thinks putting down the rebellion will add to the solidity of everything. And then you have Edmund Randolph, who's even more blunt, saying this is a chance for Washington's political opponents to be crushed. Whoa, the stakes were incredibly high. But, this whole thing, it went way deeper than just taxes or soldiers. At its very heart, this was a clash between two totally different ideas about where power actually comes from in a republic.
And this slide, right here, it just lays it all out perfectly. On one hand, you have this idea of popular sovereignty. Think of it as the spirit of 1776, still alive and kicking. It's the belief that the people themselves are the final word, and that if a law is unjust, the revolutionary mob has a right to rise up against it. But then, on the other hand, you've got the new model, constitutional authority. This idea says, hey, the people already had their say when they ratified the Constitution. Now, that written document is the supreme law. And if you don't like something, you have to work through the system. Courts, elections, that sort of thing. No more mobs. And this is a really crucial point. The rebels didn't see themselves as lawless criminals. As this quote gets at, back then, the so-called revolutionary mob was actually seen as a legitimate part of the political world. It was a way for people to be heard when they felt like the official system wasn't listening. For them, this wasn't betraying the American Revolution, it was continuing it. Okay, so you've got the country basically split in two over this fundamental idea. Who's going to be the referee here? Who gets to decide what the law actually means? Well, that question leads us straight to the guy who had to preside over the treason trials. That job fell to one guy, a sitting Supreme Court justice named William Patterson. He was sent right into the thick of it to oversee the very first treason trials under the U.S. Constitution. You can just imagine the pressure. Okay, but here's where the story takes a wild turn. Because you have to ask, who was this William Patterson guy? Was he just some random judge sent to do the government's bidding? Oh no, the answer is way more interesting, and it's absolutely central to the whole story of America's founding. I mean, just look at his resume. This is an absolute powerhouse of nation building. He was New Jersey's first attorney general. He was a delegate at the Constitutional Convention, a U.S. senator who actually wrote the Judiciary Act that created the whole federal court system. Then he was a governor, and finally, a Supreme Court justice. So here's the kicker. The guy judging the rebels, he wasn't just some government employee. He was one of the guys who literally built the whole system from the ground up. You see, back at the Constitutional Convention, Patterson was famous. He was the champion of the little guy, or the little state, anyway. He came up with something called the New Jersey Plan. He was terrified that big states like Virginia would just walk all over smaller ones like his own state, New Jersey, so he argued for a system where every state got an equal vote. Now, his exact plan didn't win, but his passionate fight led directly to the Great Compromise, which is why we have the House and the Senate today. And that's the whole point, right? The judge in this treason trial was one of the master architects of the very Constitution he was now being asked to defend. It's just incredible.
All right, so let's get back to that courtroom. But now we understand who the judge is. This isn't just any judge, it's Patterson, the nation builder, and the future of the Republic is pretty much in his hands.
And these trials, wow, they were messy and really controversial. The way the government handled it was frankly brutal. Suspects were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night, forced on these horrible marches in the dead of winter. The interrogations were shaky, the testimony was often weak. A lot of people looked at this and didn't see justice. They saw a political hit job, what they called partisan hanging parties designed to make a point.
So after all that, after this huge military show of force, dozens of arrests, all these charges of treason, the highest crime there is, how many people do you think were actually convicted? The final number was just this. Just two guys. And get this, even they were later pardoned by President Washington. That number is it's mind-boggling when you think about the massive federal response. It tells you that the juries, the regular people, were really hesitant to convict their fellow citizens of treason for what many just saw as a protest. So what's the big takeaway from all this? What was the point if almost nobody got convicted? Well, the legacy wasn't about the convictions. It was about creating a whole new understanding of what it means to be a country with a government of laws. What happened here was a huge shift in how America works. You see, we moved from that old revolutionary idea that you can just take to the streets if you don't like a law, to this new system, this constitutional framework that had been built. And the precedent that was set, the big rule that came out of all this, was that from now on, you have to work inside the system. Protest, petition, vote, fine, but you can't just take up arms against the very government you helped put in place. So really, this was never just about Wisty. It was a turning point for the whole country. And Justice Patterson, the guy who helped write the rules and then had to enforce them, he was right at the center of a process that helped cement the idea that the courts, the judiciary, get the final say on what the Constitution actually means. And it all comes back to that one huge question that this whole story is about. In a republic, who really gets the final say? Is it the raw will of the people, or is it the structure of the law? Now, the Whiskey Rebellion didn't answer that question for good, not by a long shot, but it drew a clear line in the sand. A line that, you could argue, we're still debating to this very day.